Hi there, Victor Pross speaking to you, anarchist artist. Well, I just thought I'd share some thoughts that I've been having on the question of anarchy, the borders, the recent debate between Larkin Rolls and Lawrence Southern on the border issue. And yeah, it was an interesting debate. I'm going to be recording a much fuller statement regarding that debate for Proscast on Disenthrall. But just to spit out a few thoughts now, it's interesting how on the question, on the divide, on the clash between the Bortarians, as some of the open border anarchists peg the closed border libertarians, or there are even anarchists who are not of the open border position. You know, it's not a given. It's not a anarchist doctrine. In fact, I would argue, and will argue in the Proscast. But this divide, you know, is a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy. It's not a question of open state borders or closed state borders, because the state still exists. The state still exists. So the actual moral and political divide, more so fundamentally ethical divide, is between the state and the individual. Okay, if that is the thing that has to be understood here, that is the actual fundamental philosophical principle of which all other questions are derivatives. Okay, and one derivative is the question of the borders, to be open or closed or whatnot. But to take this, to have this division as a fundamental ethical divide, the question of open border versus closed borders, it's bullshit. Okay, it's bullshit. The state still exists. The state is still calling the shots on whether those borders are to be opened or closed, and they can alternate back and forth. This is not an advancement of freedom. When they open the borders, they're doing it for their own purposes at the expense of the host population. There's a political agenda behind it. It's not a recognition of your of the citizens' rights when the borders open. It's not like a crack in the door, the cage door has been slightly left ajar now, and it's a sign of freedom because the borders are open. Okay, this is nonsense, of course. And you have to look at the country. So long as there is a top-down hierarchy where the government is calling the shots on the economy, it's calling the shots on what the laws are, it's calling the shots on the borders or whatnot, the entire country does in fact become de facto your living room. Okay, and it matters who is invited into your home, right? So we are all bound together. And when the political elite opens the borders, and within a certain context that's only made possible because of open border policies, such as having hate speech laws, such as the violent imposition of multiculturalism, of forced association, all of this can be the causal result of an open border policy when you have a state that already exists and exerting certain laws that are in catering to the open border policy, which just means a further plundering down on the rights of the individual, even more statism, depending upon the specific context. Of course, there are those cases where people simply move from A to B because they figure a better life is to be had. They're productive individuals. They don't hurt anybody. They're just moving. All of that is understood. Just moving is that context is only possible within an anarchist society. Then the question of citizenship and immigration becomes a moot point if we're talking about a stateless society. Immigration, qua immigration, is a state program. So this is basically what I would argue, and is regarding the borders. It's not an exhaustive statement. I'm going to save it for the Proscast. Now, when you have somebody like Lauren Southern, I did speak with her. I had the pleasure of speaking with her at a Sons of Anarchy event. I can tell she has a basic overall premise that, you know, hard-boiled realism is on her side, you know, because she recognizes that there is a state. We can all clustered together. We are the state. We, the people, create the state. That's they figured that the people got together, they rallied together, they became a society on a geographical turf. They decided through a process of democracy that they would have borders. So it really is of the people, by the people. And government is hard-boiled realism. If we're ever to get things done, you have to do it in the political realm. Otherwise, you are in this airy, fairy, platonic realm of idealism, completely disconnected. And this is what basically the charge is to anarchists. Of course, Patrick Smith had a very interesting thing to say on his podcast on his analysis of the debate between Larkin Rose and Lawrence Southern, in regards to just enunciating the fact that no, hard-boiled realism can also entail having fundamental ethical principles. Okay, you don't live like a beast in the field. Okay, what makes one of our distinctive human attributes is not only our capacity to reason, but is to have ethical codes. And one of the greatest blessings, that one of the codes that we could have ever devised, is non-aggression. Mutual cooperation for mutual benefit. This is how societies progressed. This is civilization. This is what you want to preserve. This is all a part of the Western canon that Patrick seems to make fun of, but which in you and I, Lauren, understand is the very philosophical foundation, the roots that's necessary if we are to have a peaceful, liberty-loving, property rights observing, non-violent compliant society that settles any contractual disputes non-violently and so forth, and deals with only actual legitimate crimes, not political crimes such as smoking a plant or anything like that. This whole nonsense of political law is nothing more than tyranny if it does not recognize the fact of the non-aggression principle and what that means and what that doesn't mean. It only comes down to physical violence. That's all has been argued by other philosophical anarchists, not to be repeated here. But that the point here is that hard-boiled realism, Lauren, it does entail having a fundamental ethical principle. So for you to take the side of the closed border, you are, as a matter of fact, justifying the existence of the state, when, as a matter of fact, that in a stateless society, all the questions of borders and immigration and whatnot would fall into private hands, and it would all be of a mutual cooperation. What comes from that, it will be. Maybe someone would buy up a whole coastline of property for the purposes of creating a wall. If he happened to be a billionaire, that would be his business, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. So, but there you go. I'm going to be speaking further on to the questions of the borders, to really make this point clear, that it is by no means, when the state opens its borders, and if it has a specific ideological purpose that it's riding on, such as a fanaticism of pathological altruism, or riding on the coattails of multiculturalism in the leftist academian sense, if they are creating laws around these philosophical premises, which is a causal factor therein, by opening the borders, because all cultures are equal. You can't say one is more than better objectively than one or another. Yeah, all of this can lead to fucking disaster. And this is what I will ultimately argue in my podcast. Thank you for listening now to a preamble of that podcast. Pop goes the culture. Victor Pross signing out.